Sometimes, the scariest stories aren't told in horror movies or urban legends. They're real, shared by ordinary people who've lived through moments so chilling they haunt them forever. Tonight, we're exploring 3 real-life horror stories shared on Reddit, stories that'll make you question how safe you really are. From an unsettling encounter with a stranger in the woods to a basement hiding eerie, forgotten secrets, and a late-night walk that took a terrifying turn, these are stories you won't be able to forget. If you enjoy true scary stories, hit the like button, subscribe, and tap the bell icon so you don't miss any of my uploads. Now grab a blanket, dim the lights, and let's get into it. I am an experienced camper who always found comfort and peace in the solitude of the wilderness. Camping alone was something I had done many times before, a ritual that offered a much-needed escape from the chaos of everyday life. But this particular trip would leave me questioning if I'd ever feel safe in the woods again. I had driven hours away from civilization, deliberately choosing a remote part of the forest far from any hiking trails or campgrounds. After hiking deep into the woods, I found the perfect spot, a small clearing surrounded by towering trees, with a nearby stream providing fresh water. It was idyllic, the kind of place where you'd expect to hear nothing but the sounds of nature. But as the day turned into night, the serenity began to unravel. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I lit a small fire and prepared my dinner. It was a routine I knew well, but as I sat by the fire, eating and enjoying the stillness, I began to hear faint noises coming from the woods around me. At first, it was nothing alarming, just the occasional rustle of leaves or snapping of twigs. I assumed it was a small animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer moving through the underbrush. But as the night wore on, the sounds became more distinct. The footsteps were heavy and deliberate, pacing just outside the glow of the campfire. Still, I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was probably just my imagination playing tricks on me, fueled by the isolation and the natural eeriness of the forest at night. I stoked the fire, hoping the light would keep any curious animals or people away. But when I glanced toward the tree line, my heart stopped. Standing just beyond the firelight was a man. The figure was barely visible, almost blending into the shadows. He wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound, just standing there, watching. My mind raced. Was it a hiker who had gotten lost, or someone else with far darker intentions? I decided to act as though I hadn't seen him, hoping that ignoring the stranger would make him go away. But the uneasy feeling in my gut told me this was no ordinary encounter. Trying to stay calm, I finished my meal and retreated to my tent, zipping it up securely. But the sense of being watched didn't go away. Lying in the darkness, I listened intently, every sound amplified by the silence of the forest. That's when I heard it, slow, crunching footsteps circling my tent. I froze, gripping the small knife I always carried for emergencies. The footsteps were deliberate, methodical, moving around the tent as if the person was studying them, testing the boundaries. Occasionally, the steps would stop, and there would be a chilling silence. Then they would start again from a different angle. I stayed perfectly still, barely daring to breathe, praying that the stranger would lose interest and leave. This went on for hours. Every nerve in my body was on edge, my mind racing with thoughts of what the man might do next. Finally, as dawn began to break and the first rays of sunlight pierced the forest canopy, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was almost deafening, but I didn't move until I was absolutely sure it was safe. As soon as the sun was fully up, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, adrenaline still pumping through my veins. The clearing was empty, but the evidence of the night's terror was all around me. Boot prints circled my tent, over and over again, leading from the edge of the woods to within inches of where I had been lying. The tracks were deep and unmistakable. Someone had been there, watching, waiting. I packed up my campsite in record time, constantly glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the man to return. As I hiked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every crack of a branch, every gust of wind felt like a potential threat. I never saw any signs of the man again, but the memory of that night has stayed with me. To this day, I don't know who he was, why he was there, or what he wanted. All I know is that I was lucky to make it out of the woods unharmed. I found out that even in the most peaceful places, danger can be just a heartbeat away. I experienced a series of unsettling events after my family moved into what seemed like the perfect home. The house was located in a quiet suburban neighborhood surrounded by friendly neighbors and well-kept lawns. From the outside, it looked like a dream home, a fresh start for the family. But inside, there was one part of the house that gave me an immediate sense of unease: the basement. The basement was unremarkable at first glance, unfinished, with concrete floors and a single exposed light bulb hanging from the ceiling. But the moment I set foot inside, I felt it. The air was different down there, thicker, colder, and oddly oppressive, even when the rest of the house was warm and welcoming. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to the natural creepiness of basements, but that uneasy feeling lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Not long after moving in, small, strange things started to happen. My family and I would notice the lights flickering in different parts of the house. At first, we thought it might be an electrical issue, but an electrician found nothing wrong. Then came the objects. Items like keys or small decorations would disappear, only to reappear in odd places. It was subtle, almost easy to ignore, but the basement door was something none of us could explain. No matter how many times we closed it, we'd always find it slightly ajar. My parents brushed it off, saying it was probably just the draft from the old windows, but I knew better. There was no draft, and the door wasn't just open, it was always open wider than before, as if something was deliberately pushing it further. One night, when I was home alone, things escalated. I was sitting in the living room, watching TV, when I heard it, a loud, rhythmic banging coming from the basement. At first, I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the house settling. But the noise didn't stop. It grew louder, more forceful, and unmistakably deliberate. It sounded like someone, or something, was trying to get out. Terrified, but unable to let the noise continue unchecked, I summoned my courage and approached the basement door. With each step, the banging seemed to grow louder. When I reached the door, I hesitated, my hand trembling as I gripped the handle. Finally, I turned it and pulled the door open. The noise stopped instantly. The silence that followed was suffocating, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I flipped on the basement light and peered into the darkness, but there was nothing there, just the empty basement, as still and quiet as ever. For weeks after that night, I avoided the basement entirely, refusing to go down there unless absolutely necessary. My family began spending less time in the house altogether. It wasn't just the basement anymore. There was a growing sense of unease that none of us could shake. The final straw came during a weekend cleaning session. We had decided to declutter the basement, hoping to make it feel less oppressive. While sorting through some old furniture, we discovered something horrifying: a small, concealed door hidden behind an old bookshelf. The door was low to the ground, almost like it had been designed for a child. When we opened it, we found a crawl space that hadn't been touched in years. Inside was a disturbing collection of items: old, rotting children's clothes, dusty toys, and carvings etched into the wooden walls. The carvings were strange, almost ritualistic, with symbols that didn't make any sense. The sight sent chills down our spines. It was as if the space had been forgotten or deliberately sealed away. We didn't stick around to find out who or what had left those items there. Within a month, we sold the house and moved out, unwilling to spend another night under that roof. Even after moving, the experience has stayed with me. I still wonder what had been in that basement. Was it something paranormal? Or was it something or someone far more dangerous? To this day, I'll never ignore my instincts again. If a place feels wrong, it's probably for a reason. It was late at night, and I was walking home after a long, exhausting day at work. The streets were almost completely empty, bathed in the dim orange glow of a few flickering street lights. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic from a nearby highway and the rhythmic crunch of my own footsteps on the pavement. It was a route I had taken countless times before and had always felt safe until this night. As I approached a particularly quiet stretch of road, I noticed a car coming up slowly behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Cars passed by occasionally, even late at night, and most didn't linger, but this one was different. Instead of continuing to drive past, the car slowed to a crawl and pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and the driver, a man in his 40s, leaned out with a smile that immediately set me on edge. The man offered me a ride, his voice overly friendly, almost rehearsed. I politely declined, explaining that my house was just a few blocks away, but the man didn't take no for an answer. He insisted that it wasn't safe to be walking alone so late, his tone still warm, but now carrying a hint of something unsettling. I repeated my refusal, this time more firmly, and quickened my pace, hoping the man would take the hint and leave me alone. He didn't. Instead, the man grew more persistent. As I walked faster, the car crept along beside me. His smile faded, replaced by an impatient look. "I'm just trying to help you," he said, his tone sharper now, less friendly. "Get in the car. I'm not going to hurt you." Those words sent a chill down my spine. The man's insistence was no longer just uncomfortable, it felt dangerous. Panic started to set in as I realized I was being followed. Trying to stay calm, I avoided making eye contact and kept walking, silently praying for the man to give up. But he didn't. Instead, he started shouting, his frustration bubbling over into anger. "I said get in the car," he yelled, his voice echoing through the empty street. The car crept closer, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. My heart pounded as I scanned my surroundings, desperate for a way out. Up ahead, I spotted the neon glow of a convenience store, its sign flickering faintly in the night. It felt like my only chance. Summoning my courage, I broke into a run, darting toward the store as fast as I could. I burst through the door, startling the cashier, and quickly explained what was happening. Out of breath and terrified, I begged the cashier to call the police. The man had followed me to the store, but he didn't come inside. Instead, he parked his car just outside the glass doors, staring at me with a cold, menacing expression. I locked eyes with him, my fear mounting as he refused to look away. For a few tense moments, he just sat there, his gaze unyielding. Then, as if deciding it wasn't worth it, he started his car. But before he drove off, he leaned out the window, his lips moving just enough for me to make out the words he was mouthing. "This isn't over." I stayed in the store until the police arrived, but by then, the man was long gone. I filed a report and gave a detailed description of the car and the driver, but the man was never found. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he wanted, and the thought of what could have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts still haunts me. This chilling experience showed me how quickly an ordinary situation can turn dangerous. I am certain that running to the convenience store and seeking help saved my life that night. I've since changed my routine, always making sure to walk home with someone or take a safer route. But even now, I can't shake the memory of that man's cold stare or his final haunting words.